If you like our content about training, then you'll love our programming too. Head to the notes below to grab a free week of general physical preparation. You get unlimited access to me and fresh programming every single week for less than $1 a day. Welcome to another episode of the High Performance Podcast. I'm here as always with my loyal co-host Jacob Mosquito, aka the Mosquito, and we're joined today by Ben Yanes, here for the three-peat on the High Performance Podcast, but I think we've got a bunch of new listeners and it's been a while since we last had him on the show, so we'll just do a general intro. But Ben, welcome back to the show.
Gus, as I now am familiar with your nickname, Gus, I wasn't aware of that before, but I'll be using it from here forward. And Jacob, I appreciate you guys having me. I'm excited to talk about whatever we're going to talk about. And I think for context, everyone should know that this was arranged about 40 seconds ago.
No, everyone knows what just, God.
But no, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be here.
No, this is the thing in fitness. No one will assume any sort of nickname of you, I've found. Everyone's a lot more respectful of your name. I don't know where the hell that sort of comes from, because every other field, when I was in music, sort of, people would just chop your name in half without sort of asking how you felt about it. So it's kind of nice. I mean, you do it. Everyone thinks it's Ben Yanes.
Yeah. I always take note of when people pronounce it the correct way. In terms of like, I feel an immense sense of positive emotion. But what? I know no longer why. You say why?
No, I was like interested because it's like, for me, I've never cared, but no one's ever said my name wrong chronically.
Yeah. No, I've just been hearing it pronounced incorrectly since I was playing Pee Wee football and I was like 6.5. So, when something starts that early in your life, you just it's just molded into the fabric of your existence,
Jacob, I haven't been saying your name wrong, have I?
No, but yeah, I feel you, Ben. People chronically get my name wrong. So it definitely does feel a bit of an elation when someone pronounces it right, for sure.
Yeah. There are worse things.
Exactly.
Ben, just for our listeners, how old are you? Because I've been telling people you're 22 for the last 3 years.
Well, it's funny because I just turned 25. Well, not just, but I'm 25 now. I'm 25 and a half. Born in 99. So I just made the cut. So I could make it theoretically in 3 centuries, which would be cool.
Talk to us about how'd you become, you're a personal trainer, right? Is that like the title you identify as?
Sure. Whatever people call me, yeah.
Yeah, how'd you get into personal training? What was your sporting background like? How'd you work out that you sort of wanted to work in the gym? And then sort of talk about why'd you start posting content, talking about it online? Like, what were the early influences and inspirations there?
Yeah, so I mean, I always tell people that I am the classic failed athlete. I played football, I played baseball, American football, not what other people know as the fake football, for a decade plus. And when you're a football athlete, especially in high school, you always have that sort of grungy strength coach who's telling you how to bench press and telling you how to back squat and telling you how to deadlift. And so that's that. I got my start like many other people kind of who've been in a similar position did. And eventually I discovered that I enjoyed lifting a lot and I didn't enjoy playing sports that much. And that's probably because I wasn't cream of the crop. I was like the better kid, on my high school team, but nothing really beyond that. So when I came into my freshman year of college, I had stopped playing sports pretty much. But I was always around sports because I was friends with a lot of athletes at my school. You're an athlete sort of growing up. You just kind of tend to make friends wherever you go that are also athletes. And I started to live with the athletes, and I worked my way somehow into an internship at my college. And kind of along the way, I was always interested in like lifting with my buddies. And for whatever reason, I sort of came to be known. I had just to be clear, I had zero knowledge of anything lifting, anatomy, biomechanics related at the time. But for whatever reason, I was the local expert on all things lifting.
Bit of fitness YouTube maybe, or like where were the thoughts coming from? Or were you just going off the cuff? Like,
no, dude, no, it was originally it was all just like pure interest in like wanting to be more muscular and pure interest in people around me who were muscular, which is honestly, I feel like I'm lucky to say that, because I feel like not that I'm not a kid at this point still, but like kids now must get all of their introductions through not real life. Like everything is just being funneled through the internet, and I really don't envy that. So yeah, it came through just meeting people, like lifting with people, becoming the guy that my bros, ask questions to, and like I said, eventually in college, I interned at my school, and I was also just training people for free. So it was kind of like I was personal training, before I was 20, I would say, in some sort of official, non-official sense, both athletes at my school, and then also people, who were just my friends at school. And eventually that turned into paid online coaching before I was even out of college, which was a pretty neat setup. It was kind of one of those situations where I was doing it for free for long enough where people just kind of offered me some money for it. And I was like, well, this is cool. This would be a nice thing to have. And by my senior year of college, that was year one of COVID. So that was kind of
unemployed in fucking university, dude. The idea of having a couple of online clients while you're in uni is like cheat code. Obviously, you have to put in the work and have the initiative to get it going. But yeah. Just sort of thinking back.
Yeah, and I to some degree I attribute that to skill in terms of like sociability and the amount of knowledge that I had at the time, which was mostly experience based. But I also just attribute it to luck and timing, as I do many other things, at least at this point. And so yeah, I was lucky enough to have like a little roster of people that I knew. It wasn't enough to like sustain me or pay for college. I was lucky enough to have parents that could do that. But by the time I was out, I mean, it was like full book of people online. I had started posting content. Now to get to the third part of the question, hopefully I'm sequencing this well enough. And I started posting content like many people as my own COVID project. Because my brother told me one day, this was before gyms in the US had like, at least most gyms had totally shut down when I was able to start filming. But my brother just said like, hey, man, I feel like this is a big part of your life. And you like teaching it to like the people that you're coaching. So why don't you just like put it online and see what happens? And, that was ground zero. And I can't really say that I had like a content inspiration. I became familiar with the concept of YouTube fitness in college.
Yeah, so you weren't like an Omar Isaf or like you weren't like just crushing heaps of interesting.
No, but I definitely dabbled and I got familiar with all that stuff. Kind of like I feel like after I had some of my own experience,
like how could I do this good if I'm going to put effort into it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like when I was younger, I never saw people in fitness on YouTube. I just never sort of made the connection. Like I never looked at it and said, that's a job or, oh, that's something I want to do. It was just like, background noise while I was eating, mac and cheese at dinner. So yeah, I mean, from there, I mean, as the saying goes, the rest is history. I've posted something in some form every day since then. And, here we are. I don't know how many days it's been, but a lot of days, surely over 1,000 days of posting every day.
Have you missed a day?
No, I have not missed a single day.
Damn.
Fuck. I left my phone in an Uber one day in London and I missed a day.
Ooh.
He's got you there, Gus.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is like, how
so there was no one viral post that did all like, because this is I just want to stomp that out. Just this idea.
Yeah.
And I've been there for I think I started following you. Maybe you did have 2,000 followers and you'd been posting for a bit, but like, yeah, it's been quick to get to 500,000, but like, I would say that your growth to 6,000 and 10,000 is pretty medium paced.
Yeah, it was over a year. It was over a year.
Hectic.
So, and I mean, that's how a lot of those things, I guess, seem to work. Not always, but on average, it seems to be kind of slow at all at once. But the interesting thing to me about it is that a lot of people seem to be subscribed to this idea that like they should ask people who are obsessed with working out, how they should be motivated to work out. And those are the wrong people to ask, like just straight up wrong people to ask. Like this is, unless you're someone who from the ground up was completely unmotivated and now here you are at this obsessed stage, which is not most people. It's kind of like a pathology. So if someone asks like, hey, Ben, how do you post, over 1,000 days, 1,200 days in a row? I'm like, it would be more difficult for me to sit through the discomfort of not posting it for a day. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm this like super disciplined the person who has this tight schedule and I've mapped out, the next month of content. I'm just like, something just needs to go up,
Well, but the upside of posting for you is so tangible because through all the fire, I imagine you track your business metrics and stuff like that. You're like, well, generally speaking, this is how many customers I get in the door per week. And like my daily Instagram post is just a part of the process, whether it's making people aware that I exist or nurturing the relationship and getting someone closer to becoming a customer. I think that I think I'm so high on you because I think you've done so many things well that I think a lot of people tell you not to do or to avoid from the outset. And I just think you fucking nailed it. And if I could start out again in the industry, I'd be trying to do it exactly like you. Because I know you've experienced this, people just being like, no, you're a young coach. Like, you're not an educator. And these are the things that I kind of agree with as well. Like, I see people's point, but and I think there's this other sort of side to it. Like, you're just taking people on a fucking journey. You're not like, just because you post content, you're not like, yeah, I'm finished learning. Like, what's your perspective on it? Like, why should a young coach feel like they can teach people things, or is that even where it comes from? Like, what's your view of it?
Well, first of all, I'm flattered and I appreciate that, and I think something similar of you, but we can discuss that after hours. I think that like in the early stages, that's kind of like the stress test of the internet, and in my specific context, and likely I'm guessing in yours, right? It's like, and by the way, don't let me forget that this still happens in many ways. It's just there's a different version. It's just evolved. And so I think that like regardless of what the stress test is, if you're going to create content, like you have to be really aware of the fact that there's always going to be some kind of pushback. And I just think that it's totally up to you how much weight you give it. And so, if someone, for example, said to me at the time, like, Ben, you're way too young to be doing this, which many people did. You don't know shit. You haven't had the years under your belt. You need to be coaching for a decade. The list goes on, right? If someone who I really, really deeply respected said that to me, I would probably take it to heart and I probably would have thought more about it. But no one that I valued the opinion of ever said that to me once, right? And when I specifically asked them, because I'm like, hey, like maybe I'm wrong in this regard. Like maybe I got to like fix the way I'm doing things. No one in my life who I really genuinely respect and cared about, both from a personal and from an education perspective, was ever, we'll say, strongly worded in that sense, right? There were some caution that they would give me in terms of, hey, maybe you should be a little bit less of an asshole about your messaging, which I'm sure we can maybe talk about because that's changed a lot over time. But beyond that, it was basically just how much do I really value the opinions of these people? And it's not that if I knew you, I wouldn't, but I just don't. We as people who make content, we don't know a vast majority of the individuals who are watching our stuff and commenting on our stuff. And so for me, it was just never compelling. And I don't know, it just never really sunk in as something that was particularly relevant to me. It's not that I never had doubts about it, but I just preferred to do it rather than to not do it. And I've never really been someone to shy away from things that people tell me not to do. In fact, I would say that, and my fiance knows this better than anyone, the second that someone tells me that I shouldn't do something in a totally disrespectful way, like that's the fuel, for the next month of my life, or the next 5 minutes, depending on the scenario. So no, for me, it was just never really something that even registered at a deep level, to be honest. And this is almost the first time that I'm actually sort of putting the pieces together because of just how irrelevant it was to me and how irrelevant that it is. And the other thing that I was going to say now in terms of just the concept of the stress test is that as a content creator, I feel like you come into it and you're like, oh, like these are just the initial stages, or like you see a growth spurt and you're getting more heat from different kinds of people, and you're like, oh, like this is it. Like I just got to make it through this, and then the goalpost moves somewhere else, and once people forget about the other thing, then they'll just direct their attention to something new and something accessible. So for me now, whenever I post, let's say, oh, here's how you target this muscle, right? It's, oh my God, you bro, you've never competed in bodybuilding. You don't weigh 280 pounds at 3% body fat. Like, who are you, to espouse any kind of information related to muscle building? And I just sort of fall into the same story with that. It's taken me a while. I honestly think this one was harder than the first one because it's more of like a, I think as people who train super hard, we tend to have insecurities about the way we look. And so just first recognizing that, and then also just recognizing the fact that, you're never going to be able to speak to everyone. And really at this point, I'm just interested in talking to people who are interested in listening. And beyond that, I really couldn't care less about what your particular input is if you're not willing to invest some degree of thoughtfulness into the things I'm saying and into the ideas that I have. So that is kind of the progression of the stress test. And I'm sure the next stress test will be something different from this one. And so now at least I can expect it and so on. But there's no way that I'll be able to prepare for it beyond just, being aware of what's happening as it is.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I just wanted to take a second to let you know that Angus has poured all of his knowledge on e-commerce and organic content into an ebook, which is now available. If you want to check it out, head to the show notes or the link in Angus's bio. Thanks.
I like the concept of the stress test because, it can be sort of that stressful time on when to post. I feel like there's people in two camps with posting content. They overthink the content. Is this going to be shit? Should I post it? Let's just do it. Let's just start the content streak on another day. And then there's people just posting just not really value-based content. How do you navigate out of that sort of two stressful camps to start to get the ball rolling much better?
So let's assume that the person that we're talking about is like a very sort of like initial stage person, right? Like doesn't really have an audience, doesn't really know their path. I feel like my solution to this, because it's kind of the only experience that I have and the only experience I'm comfortable communicating, is just that like my content has always and will always just be a reflection of whatever I'm learning. And so my opinion on this is that if you don't know what to post or you're too focused on what responses will be, it means that you're directing attention away from where the attention should be directed. So this is kind of like the wake-up call that I have unfortunately had to give to many people in as nice a way that I could, which is just that if you don't know what to post, or if you're super worried about what other people are going to say about what you're going to post, then you probably don't feel particularly confident about what you know and about what you can communicate in terms of how clear it is, how concise it is. And of course, like those nerves and those hesitancies, they'll always be there. But I just feel like my guiding light has always been, what am I learning? And what am I trying to help other people learn? And as long as that has stayed at the very pinnacle of the sort of hierarchy of importance for me, sure, I've been nervous about posting this or this response or whatever, but it just, when you have, I think those priorities set in order, you can always sort of reliably come back to them as a sort of, algorithm of what you should do next. So I find that probably in 90+% of cases, the problem for people doesn't seem to just be, I'm nervous about what to post or I'm worried about the response. It's, I don't have any valuable information in my head. So like go spend 6 months learning something and then report back, and guess what? You're still going to get things wrong. And that's where learning is like so beautiful. Is like the thing that you said last year is the thing you're just totally disgusted by this year. And that's just beyond exciting to me. And I've never like had a day where I'm just like, I don't really know what to post, because I'm just constantly like thinking about different things, teaching people like through consultations and in-person sessions. And that just creates this well of like content and questions. And, once you get to a certain point in terms of like audience growth, the content is just given to you. Like people will just ask you things. So if you're at that point, then just write stuff down. Like if you're someone who makes content on a daily basis, you probably get questions every day. Boom, there's your content. And there are the things that like you should maybe pay more attention to or learn more about. But I think that's potentially a hot take and maybe lacks nuance in some instances. But I think that overall, that's the most common problem that I see is just simply not really knowing and teaching anything particularly valuable.
Makes sense though. Definitely does.
Can we get some stats? Because like I frequently find myself telling people like when they call Squat University like weak, I'm like, no, he's got shit ideas on training, or maybe you disagree with his ideas on training and rehab, but do clean and jerks 150 kilos. I think he's snatched, I'm pretty sure it's 110. Maybe he's done 112, 115 at 85 kilos, which is pretty solid. So many people, like, their one thing to say about it's like, oh, he's young, oh, he knows nothing about training. But then a lot of them, they're like, why would you listen to fucking Ben Yanes? He doesn't have any muscle. I'm like, I don't know, like, dude's pretty fucking jacked up. What are the stats? You got a bicep measurement? Or just give us a height and weight because you're in fairly good condition. And I know you had a powerlifting stint. And I know you've sort of revisited the barbell lifts. I want to know some numbers there too, please.
So on the revisiting thing, I'll just put a cap on that. I was basically doing it for a month or like 6 weeks. And I said to myself, this is really boring. And I'm going to go back to this other stuff, which is kind of unfortunate, but I got what I wanted out of it. It was very exciting at first. Yeah, so I'm about 6 feet tall and I weigh about 200 pounds, 195, 200 pounds. Body fat, don't know, probably between 12 and 15, 12 and
good
16.
Abs, tense hard.
Yeah, for sure. Especially with the right lighting, the right camera. In terms of the power lifts, I mean, my best bench press was a paused. I never competed, so you have to take my word
none
for
of it counts.
No, none of it counts. My best bench press was 375 at a pounds. My best squat was at a 550, and my best deadlift was at a 605. And those were at 180 pounds.
160 kilo bench press, roughly 550 is like a 250 kilo squat. What was the deadlift? Sorry,
605.
273, 74 kilos. Fucking solid.
Damn.
That's fucking solid. It's so funny because specifically one of the people I'm thinking of that always calls you skinny and weak, one of the lifts that they hang their hat on is a 600-pound deadlift. I'm like, I saw Ben Yanes said that at 22. Like, we just got to be anyway, fucking whatever. Ben's way less insecure than me, so he doesn't fucking respond the way and get fucking his bristles up like I do about it.
Yeah, I don't know, man. The story just eventually got boring. You know what I mean? To the stress test conversation. I don't know, man. Like eventually you see something enough times and it just, it's just like right over the head. I don't know if that happens for everyone. But for me, that's kind of the how that developed.
I know, obviously, there's this big imposter accusation, like you're not a real bodybuilding coach, can't be talking about that shit online unless you've competed. I know you don't care about that. Is there any part of you that just wants to do a show for the experience, or do you have competitive desires, or are you just like, nah, you love training?
Yeah, no, honestly, not a single little hair follicle on my body has a desire to compete in anything. I don't know exactly why, and I don't know exactly if that will be the case in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. Maybe I'll have some kind of midlife crisis. But as of now, I'm really just enjoying what I'm doing. I'm enjoying my life. And I think I'm okay with just being like, I kind of like where I'm at. I enjoy training. I enjoy the creativity of, figuring new things out to experiment with. That's kind of like one of my primary motivators, if there are any. But I just love training, and I love, messing around and finding little quirky setups that people can use, if they're struggling with, a setup that I've posted in the past. So
take all the fucking D handles in the gym.
No, but I thought that you would appreciate the You would appreciate the tib raise. I set up this tib
You've been
raise.
smashing tib raise content. I'm like, Ben, fucking helmet. Like,
Dude,
no, I respect it.
I never thought of the lying leg curl. That was good.
It's good.
Yeah, one day I was thinking of you, Angus, and I was like, what would Angus do right now? He would sit backwards on this lying leg curl and pound some dorsiflexions right now.
You know what? Like, life will always find a way to make an ass of you, and I really struggle with dorsiflexion in sprinting. And I think it's one of those things that people obsess over too much. And I'm like, am I about to start doing some tip raises again? Because I'm trying to just solve it through coordination and like, yeah, just like, Jesus, this is life's funny like that. Anyway, fucking whatever. I sort of want to get into that. I had a question written down about anchors. Oh, should we go to that now? Yeah, fuck it. Because I think it's an interesting conversation. Sort of, it's been beat to death through people like myself, you, shout out to Tim Riley, all sorts of people being like, machines are plenty functional and they're really useful specifically for not just hypertrophy training, but also it is just strength training at the end of the day. But then I think there's this other conundrum when you really go down the rabbit hole on machines like you have, where you're like, man, there's so many different shape size human beings. And a lot of these contraptions, like, yeah, there's elements that you can play with on the setup, but they're not that variable. Like the chair is just a certain size. What are your thoughts about encouraging people to almost like make their own machines? Is this where the anchor stuff sort of comes from, trying to solve that problem? Or
okay, so clarification of the question. So when you say make their own machines, no. Great question.
Using external stability.
Mm-hmm. And are you saying making their own machines in terms of like mimicking machine type motions elsewhere, or crafting the setup on the machine such that it becomes much easier for usability?
I guess it's not even that. It really is just like looking at machine-based training, I guess, and be like, what is the value in that? And it's like, I guess external stability is the main asset that machines provide. Do you agree with that? Or is there other things?
I would definitely say so. That is, I think, principally the first thing that I would think of. And honestly, you could use that same word for the other benefits, but like the main benefits of using machines, number one is just the fact that, you know, it seems kind of obvious, they're designed for particular things, right? So like a preacher curl machine that is pin loaded is set up in such a way where you can load elbow flexion in a way where, well, I'll use the word efficient. The technical term would be tangential for those physics people out there. You can load, let's say, an elbow flexion exercise more efficiently, both from the perspective of actually having a stable support off of which you can curl, number one, and then number two, some kind of guided path that actually matches the mechanics of the joint. Now, there are many situations, which is what you're kind of alluding to, wherein people will sit down on a machine, they won't really know how to set it up. They use this thing once and they feel like shit on it, and so now, therefore, all machines are awful and they will create dysfunction and pain. That's kind of the story that I hear a lot, and I think it comes from this narrative that like machines are basically these like simple, sort of low resolution, low level pieces of equipment that you just sit down on and just like, patter away on. And what I've spent a lot of time looking into over the last couple of years is just like how much work needs to go into the design of these things, and just how silly it is to, in general, I hear people say this all the time. They're like, this machine sucks, this leg extension. And I'm like, bro or bra, you have no idea why it sucks. You have no idea what you're doing. You have no idea that like you could simply just move the seat in this other position and it would feel perfect, or you could orient your femurs in this position and it would feel much better. And so just kind of getting sidetracked here because this is something I love talking about. But yeah, anchoring and sort of external stability would be one. And then there's also the sort of anchoring and stability that is within the path of the machine. In other words, if I want to use a chest press machine, I'm not going to be able to press it up to the sky or down to the floor. I'm not going to be able to press it out of the plane that it's moving. And so that provides, a sense of guidance and constraint that will actually allow people to get in a ton of work when they, in and of themselves, aren't particularly skilled at moving around. And so one of the things that I've and I think why I focus so much on this, external stability anchoring concept is just because I really desperately want to dispel this lie that we've all been told about machines in general, which is this idea that like they're somehow going to do the work for you. They're somehow going to destroy your joints. They're somehow going to put you in a position where you're not going to be able to bend over to tie your shoes or to grab a cup in the cupboard. It's just totally nonsensical. And sort of once you break that spell, then all of a sudden it just becomes like, oh, this is literally a bunch of metal that I'm pushing, pulling, raising, doing, leg extending against. And the piece of metal is pushing my body in a direction, and I'm moving opposite of that direction to, move the weight stack. And that's all it really has to be, in the same way that you grabbing a dumbbell imposes force on your hand, and, you can do whatever you want with the dumbbell. So, to me, it's just machines allow for a lot of things that, let's say, something like dumbbells or barbells don't. And then similarly, barbells and dumbbells allow for a lot of things that machines don't. So the sort of false dichotomy of like, pick one or the other, I think is also something that should be cautioned against. And I think that overall, if you just zoom out enough and you're just like, hey, this is a body, and like certain things are pushing and pulling on the body, and then you can, be a lot less sort of dogmatic about these opinions. And, that way you don't end up saying just a bunch of stuff that really has no basis in not only just like practice, but also like research, right? Because like this is also something that is starting to kind of emerge in literature as well. So I'll kind of leave it there.
I actually had a question about you. Like, I'm pretty obsessed with machines. A lot of people might not give a fuck about that. With all this discussion about machine-based training, a lot of people, especially liking certain brands that seem to be like market leaders in definitely being a bit more optimized, like Prime comes to mind, maybe Atlantis. I don't know how much they're in the development stage now. I've seen a lot of people be like, this talk about shit machines, and they're definitely out there, right? I mean, I believe that just because I see so many different designs, and I'm like, well, one of these is probably lining up for people a little bit better than the others. But do you think, what's your opinion on shit machines? Like for the average person, like, because there is so much value in just setting them up in a way that they can train hard? Or you're like, nah, some of them, like, I don't know, maybe it's the resistance profile or some other aspect of it is so shit. Or is the talk of shitty machines overhyped? It's more user error.
I think it is probably 94.7% user error.
Because it's not as simple as it's made out to be. It's like, it's simple once you've set it up and when you're locked in, but it's like, no, it's not just throw your client on there or throw yourself on there and pump away. You've got to line some things up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I would just say that, like, I think that if you're a trainer who's really not comfortable using certain machines, I think that you should take the time to learn about the machine. Like, I think that's fine. And in the meantime, like, go grab a pair of dumbbells, do assisted push-ups. Like right now, let me just, slight tangent. I started training my mom somewhat recently because she's in her 60s now, and she's starting to realize, like, oh shit, guys, should probably like do something, to extend my health, my health span. And so I'm training her in her basement. And we do it on Zoom now, but in the initial sessions, I would drive over to my parents' house to do it. And I basically have her full program, like dumbbell only, barbell only, assisted body weight. And she's absolutely crushing, like totally crushing. Like she's feeling better. Her back no longer hurts, right? Like the general population that like most trainers are working with, you don't need all the equipment in the world, right? And I think sometimes these kinds of ideas can maybe go a little bit sideways when people then become like machine obsessed, and then they start to demonize the other stuff, and everything else all of a sudden becomes, crappy and suboptimal. And it's like, no, I think really depending on who you're talking about, both things clearly tend to work. But in terms of the user error thing, it's hard to discuss the user errors on a generalized level because it is always like, in some sense it's principle based, right? But in another, it's like you really need the visuals. It's like the other day, for example, I was training someone who was like on a machine press, and in the bottom of the machine press, like his shoulder was bugging him. And what we did was we just like tucked his elbow in a little bit more to move his elbow in line with the arc of the machine. And things like, and just like, so it's just like little stuff like that, right? The arc of the machine is moving out of line of the plane of motion of the joints, right? That's like a general, that's like a sort of common thing. Another good example, just for people listening, might be something like, oh, I've sat, and maybe an obvious one, I've sat down on a leg extension and my knees are oriented, 25 degrees, laterally, instead of being in line with how the machine is actually moving.
Knee barring yourself a bit.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Oh my God. Yeah, my brain explodes when I see that. And then, everything from there, like down to the micro, like, so for example, just to stick with the leg extension example, like, okay, we have this like higher level thing of make sure your kneecaps are pointed in the right direction. But that now becomes a question of like, should you have your knee in line with the axis? Does that whole thing make sense? How far should the, back should the seat be? Where specifically should you be pulling to anchor yourself down? What do you do with the feet and the toes? Is that something you should concern yourself with? Where should the pad be? Should the pad roll? Should it not roll? How should the friction of the actual seat relate to the skin underneath of your thigh? Because a lot of times what happens is people sit down, and if they're sticky and moist from training, like their skin will literally create a knee flexion moment. Like as they extend, I don't know if either of you have ever felt this, but
all of these things you're saying have floated through my head at one point or another on the leg extension.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like you have, I just listed whatever 5 or 10 considerations, not that you need all 5 to 10, but if you don't know 1 or 2 of those things as a trainer and you're responsible for this person's physical, health in front of you, probably wise to perhaps learn a bit of that first before you just willy-nilly, go and throw people down. So
fuck this, I'm going back to Olympic weightlifting. These machines are too technical for me. And it's so funny, like, because it really does highlight, it's like, it's as technical as you want to make it. And there's value in the weeds on both ends. Because like, one big thing I'm on right now is like, the Olympic lifts don't have to be technical. Like, I appreciate that they can be, but then you're sort of showing me this other side. Because my attitude to machines is typically that it's like, by and large, just strap in and have some fun. But then there is this other side, like, well, no, a lot of different shape people, a lot of different outcomes, a lot of different setup options and variants amongst machines.
And this is maybe a bit of a selection bias, but I have worked with a lot of people historically who just are very pain sensitive. So I've had to like really, clients specifically, right? Like people who they move 10 degrees out of position and it's like, oh, that shoulder injury from, last year is bugging me again. Or I had this discussion recently with my...
If you want access to a community of like-minded coaches, head to the notes below and join our free school community. I'm in there every week doing Q&As, and there's plenty of educational content on the way as well.
Training partner who maybe you met, he's a pro bodybuilder, and he's also a trainer. He's been a trainer for over a decade in the city. And what we kind of came to, because we had the same conversation, was that as trainers, I think a lot more. So if you have two sort of buckets of an exercise, you have like the setup. So where you position yourself prior to, and then you have the execution. Those are what you're doing during the exercise. Machines tend to involve a lot more work in the setup, and they involve a lot sort of more mindless execution. But free weights, cables, those kinds of implements, anything similar, a lot less work in the setup, because what are you going to do? You grab the pair of dumbbells or whatever, but potentially a lot more work in the execution.
Yeah, you're doing it all, every single rep, you're setting it up.
Exactly. Right. So, it's just a trade-off there. I'm not necessarily saying that you should do one or the other, or you should do both. But I just think that's something interesting to point out, and maybe for people to think more about, just in terms of like, oh, maybe that means that I should do the chest press machine later, because later I'm going to be tired and I'm not going to want to think as much. And I'm just going to be like, oh, me push on handle, rather than like, I got to, hold these dumbbells. I got to put them on my knees. I got to sit back. Those are, minor considerations, but I still think relevant to at least some populations.
Yeah, checked out training is checked out training. High quality training is always like switched on. And yeah,
exactly.
Going through all of these machines, looking through different setups, I'm sure it's come to your mind that, man, I could make a cool machine. Have you ever thought of an idea of a machine that you would make with an unlimited budget, say?
So I'm at a stage where I'm very comfortable with like the exercise physics stuff on the level that I feel like I need to understand it. The level of understanding that one needs to have to craft, like I have many ideas, but the delta between that and like, oh, here's like this finely printed, map of this machine is just so much larger than I think I can even possibly imagine. But nevertheless, yes, I do have ideas. I think that one of the things that I really desperately want is a hyperextension machine that is, I don't know if you guys have used the Atlantis one.
Is this with the cable attachment?
Yeah, so there's a cable attachment, but it's not actually.
You can also put it far away from the ground as well, I've noticed, because I hit the ground on so many of my setups, which then I have to change it.
Yeah, so that one goes up to 60 degrees. I would like to basically make a hinging machine where there's just a pad, there's an anchor for the thigh, and then there's an anchor on the back of the thigh and not the fucking bottom of the heel. Because people get in that thing, and if they have any amount of knee sensitivity, it's like, no, like not great. And it really limits loading, especially like I've tried to load that thing up with like hundreds of pounds. It feels terrible.
So just clamp that femur down on both sides. Yeah, take the knee out of it.
Yeah, take the knee out of it totally, or just put it like directly below the knee if we're, or just make it adjustable. Hell, just make it adjustable, and then attach it to a cable and have it be such that you could do like a cable hyperextension. That one is not as complicated as something like a really well made like vertical lat pull down that is an arcing motion. I don't really have a ton of machines in mind other than the newest Prime pull down, which I haven't actually used, that are like great vertical pull downs. Like in order to use the typical hammer pull down and for it to feel like I want it to feel, I need like 3 different, accessories that no one is ever going to buy. And so, yeah,
do you like the Nautilus machine lat pull down? Is that sort of heading in the direction, or is that the more the machine you're talking about with the handles that sort of so that's with hooks?
Yeah, that's definitely headed in the direction.
Or are you talking about these ones?
It's more the one. So the actual arc of the machine would be like you would be pulling this way, and the lever for the machine would be going back behind you to a weight stack that is pivoting behind you.
I know them.
Yeah. So the actual arc of the machine would actually hopefully match the path of your humerus, at least in the sort of bottom portions. Basically just a fucking pull down that's really heavy at the top is the simple way to say it. Which very few pull downs are. So those would be my 2 major concerns perhaps. But beyond that, I tend to try to devote mental energy to things that I can act on now. And I am definitely not smart enough to design a machine. But I have had many ideas for like accessory type things that would be potentially that I could just pay someone to, develop for me. So those kinds of ideas are potentially loading.
Like a handle or something you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one idea that I had was like a sort of cuff related thing that you could also use, for presses, because I've used some like other versions of it that have been quite, I will say failures. And so, but beyond that, nothing that's really consequential, like nothing that would actually really, people would be like, oh yeah, I need that. No, nothing like that.
On the topic of lats, I think, again, over the last couple of years, it's one of those conversations. There's been so many different debates about lats, where they lose leverage, whether the subdivisions of it are relevant. And it's led to people approaching their lat training in a number of different ways. And like, I honestly, my point of confusion with where I'm at with it now, I'm like, is, just that conversation of going from like, oh, the lat pull down, like the OG traditional lat pull down, maybe it's not the best way to target the lats. Could be a lot of Terry's emphasis. A lot of people, do they even know the difference between their teres and their lats? They were probably trying to grow that anyway. But as far as the lats specifically, is there one arm path you can recommend that'll give you a good mix of everything? Or is it just the fact that like, no, the humerus can move on so many different paths, And the lats, it's like you're referring to such a big group of muscles. There is just no one path that is going to really do it all justice. And so don't think about your training that way. Just think about creating different rowing actions with the humerus. How should I think about it? As someone, especially where like I can't go hit 3 lat movements, but I can hit where I'm at now. I've got horizontal rowing and horizontal pulling and vertical pulling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and honestly, like it's I'm sure you're familiar with the midwit meme. Of that's kind of where I've ended up. Right. Which is like at the beginning is precisely what you said. It's like something horizontal, something vertical, with the caveat that like I would just make it, tight to your body. And then I'll caveat it one more time later. Somewhere in the middle of the midwittery, it was like, 120 degrees and like slight adduction and pull to the hip and rotate the trunk contralateral. And, just the list kept going.
Do you side bend?
Yeah, do your silence. And now I'm back to narrow vertical pull down, narrow kind of row. If I had to be nitpickier, it wouldn't be like horizontal, it would be slightly above horizontal, just because the amount of protraction you have increases with a little bit more flexion. But I think the most important thing, honestly, with lats that I've really paid attention to in the last like year and a half ish has just been their function from the perspective of the shoulder girdle rather than just the humerus. So what people I think could recognize or conjure up an image of in their head is like the difference between moving your arm would be like, just imagine like a row where you're just focusing on like your upper arm bone versus something that's more like, like if you were hanging from a bar and you're doing scap pull-ups. Right. So those are like 2 distinct categories of motion that often overlap. And the lats, in terms of like, if there were such a thing as a primary function, which like on a technical level just drives me off a wall to say primary function. But in this case, if we're just going to roll with it, it would be to move and slide the shoulder girdle. So something that's really staggering to me is I posted this, little variation where I was basically just doing like a cable single arm like depression, and people just totally lost their minds at that. I never kind of expect when things are going to go south, and when they're not. But nevertheless, I think the takeaway there is basically just load your arms vertically and focusing in that instance on shrugging and reverse shrugging, up to down shoulder girdle stuff, and then a row that is like forward to backward shoulder girdle stuff. And then I think that's pretty much like good to go. I think that the other considerations like, is slightly wider better or is across the body better? Those to me ultimately come down to the practical limitations of a situation rather than the technical limitations. So what I mean by that is like on one extreme, if I'm training with a pro bodybuilder whose meat is literally just getting in the way of them being able to pull their arm across the body, I don't give a shit. Okay, we're going to go forward and backward. Or on the other end of the spectrum, if my mom, who's trying to perform this pull down, has pain in this narrow path and not in this wide path, guess what? We're going to go with the wide path, and we're just going to focus more on sort of like armpit motion rather than arm motion. And I think that's a really good like heuristic for people to think about when they're thinking about like rowing in general.
Definitely changes how I would approach it.
Yeah. Is like, are you pulling with your armpit or are you pulling with your arms? And those two things feel very different, even if the persistence of the scenario is close to identical.
Following on with sort of talking about the humerus, with arm training, you sort of, because I know it affects, especially with the heads of the tricep, and as well, especially if you're trying to like fill in a gap for your tricep development that you're not getting from your pressing movements. And then I imagine also filling a gap on your biceps that you're not getting from your rowing movements. Because I've just noticed how much my humerus moves around even when I'm trying to keep it stable when I'm doing my arm training. Because what my question is for you, with that being like, I'm trying to bring up my arms, I'm doing pressing and I'm doing pulling, where like I know the arms get indirectly trained, and yeah, the humerus is going to be moving. So if I want to get that truly unique stimulus, just fix the humerus as much as possible in all my arm training? Or should I not worry about that? It's like, nah, just find some variations where I just feel like I get amazing stimulus to fatigue with where I'm at. Not really a concern.
Yeah, I would say like if I'm picturing the average person versus you, I think this question changes because like a lot of times the average person, you know, if they're doing a set of like straight bar pull downs, like sometimes like 50% of that or like chin grip pull downs doesn't matter. A lot of times like 50% of the stimulus is like going to their arms just based on the way that they're like, yeah, it's something like that. Right. So in a lot of instances, but even in that case, I'm kind of like, okay, maybe we focus more on sort of like hyper fixating on anchoring the humerus down or on top of something. I think in your particular case, like it's probably not particularly consequential in terms of the stimulus, but I would also add that there's nothing that would make your arm training more specific to your arms than using some kind of external stability, right? Like, and it's as simple as just putting like, so even if we don't address this from a specific muscular standpoint, like, oh, is this going to bias more brachialis?
Yeah.
Or, you know, because of the sort of reverse action of my biceps at my shoulder, like you can get into that, but we can also then just be like, well, what is the more specific thing relative to what I'm trying to do? And in your case, I think it's probably like, yeah, fix your arm somehow.
Elbow
I think it's
bending.
a lot. Yeah, elbow bending. Yeah, I think it's a lot less relevant in general for triceps related stuff, just because of how some of the constraints and the force directions change. And, you know, for example, like when you're doing a biceps curl with a dumbbell, let's say, like you don't have any ability to really easily use your pecs and your lats to hold your shoulder in one place. But if you're doing a triceps push down, like if you're close to the cable, right, and you're not 50 feet away from the cable, most of that load is something that's trying to sort of shrug you, right? So you can very easily sort of hunker down with your lats and your pecs, and you can pretty much, you know, work to. So it's kind of like, what muscles do you have access to? And in the case of a lot of curls, you have fewer muscles to sort of hold you in place. Like think about any curl variation you could do. You know, of course, you could like squeeze the shit out of your arms to your sides, but like no one wants to be focusing on that when they're doing a curl, right? You kind of want that to naturally arise.
Then you almost the dumbbells whacking you as well. Like I've noticed. I have tried that. Yeah, just keep it tight, almost using that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, for you, I would say it makes sense to, you know, fix your humerus in either case, but for triceps, it's probably less consequential. Although, you know, a really simple one that I have loved for a lot of people is just like, if you have access to a normal cable column, just like putting the cable super high and just jamming your arm into the side of the cable column. If you're doing it single arm, it just takes away, like, it's really surprising to me actually, how much of the time people will anchor one or both sides of their arms. Like, you know, you could jam your elbow in and that actually hold it there with your other hand, and how that will change discomfort. I don't quite understand the math here.
Yeah. Right.
But like, I just have to breathe.
It's 90-90 hip lift, but for you,
right. It all comes back to the 90-90 position. Yeah. But, you know, even something as simple as like if you're doing an overhead tricep extension, like laying down on a bench and just like, you know, putting your arm on the bench to do the extension, it just seems to, for whatever reason, talk to the brain in a simpler way. And, you know, for me, that's enough of a reason. Like I went through a time period where I was like being really esoteric about like, well, why, you know, if there's a flexion moment instead of an extension moment, like why would that, you know, perhaps this sort of compressive effect of the rear delt, and the list just kept going. And you know, regardless, it's like, if it works, it works, you know, to the end of the sort of mid-wit conversation. Yeah. So yeah, the answer I would say is yes. One more thing that I would say just on the bicep specific level that I think is relevant for people to know is this like short head, long head thing. If you're concerned about like which head of your biceps you're targeting, and you simultaneously don't know which head is which head, I would just drop the concern altogether. I think a better one that I've heard is the short head of triceps, when in fact there is no short head of triceps. I understand what people mean, but just, it's kind of like, you kind of see where I'm going with it. It's like, there's this,
it's like, if you want to go near it, it's a cabin. It's not like a puddle to step into. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I just thought I would mention that because I think it's worth mentioning.
Everything is different now. It's like, fuck, is 5 quads potentially, and like, I mean, like, that makes a lot of sense. The more we look at humans, it's like, we're going to realize that there's probably more differences. Oh, sorry, there's always going to be a lot of similarities. Sorry, I'm meant to be shutting up. Jacob, what's your question?
So me and Angus both love to balance multiple qualities: power, speed, endurance. We've asked a couple coaches, what are your thoughts on the minimum effective dose for building muscle year round? And what are some volume and intensity landmarks? Or is it just body part dependent as well? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I find this conversation really interesting in terms of like where people go with the response, because it kind of says a lot about both like what experience that coach or person has had, and then also like kind of where they prioritize their thought. So in my own experience, where my head goes with this first is like, we have to kind of address the assumptions that we're making when we talk about volume and what volume is and what constitutes volume.
Dude, what,
because like,
great fucking question. Because I don't, if I honestly had to track it and equate it, how the fuck do you do that? People don't say that enough. Yeah, track it. Like, what, a set of leg extensions compared to a set of squats.
Yeah, or like a set of leg extensions that I do versus the set of leg extensions that my mom did.
Yeah,
you know, on her first time.
You're strapped in and fucking.
Dude, you know what I will say is I'm getting to a point. Total brag, but I'm getting to a point where a lot of the machines that I use now, I'm able to full stack them. Today, I full stacked a leg extension. First time using this particular machine without a belt. So let that just let that sink in.
But straps and handles.
No straps.
Okay, no, that is solid. Okay, so he can do it raw.
Tips.
Raw dog the leg extension there.
Yeah, just for the listeners. That one's just for the listeners. Anyhow, so that's where my mind goes, right? Is like most of the people that I know that like when I see them do their sets and I say like, hey, how many did you have left? You know, how many could you have done? Usually the answer is probably anywhere between like 50 and 300% like error. So like if I thought they could do, you know, one more, maybe they say, you know, I couldn't have done any more, right? And that's like a, you know, small sort of difference. But more often than not, they say they couldn't do more and they had 5, 10, who knows, like 15. A lot of times that's how it works out with Gen Pop. But understanding that that's not really the population we're working with, I just find that like so much of the time we're just talking about different things here. So if I said like, I do 5 sets of hamstrings a week, which right now is true. I do 5 sets of hamstrings a week. Next week, when I do hamstrings, this actually happened to me this past week. I get down on the leg curl to do my leg curls that day, and my hamstrings are still sore. So it's like, what am I supposed to make of that? Does that mean that I can't progress? No. Like I added more load, I had more reps. But like for me, there are certain groups that sort of fall into that like lower end of the set volume range. So if we, you know, make an arbitrary range of like, you could progress from anywhere from 2 sets a week to 20 sets a week. There are certain muscle groups on average for me that fall closer to the 2. And there are certain groups that just by virtue of their structure, their architecture, the joints they cross, the amount of divisions they have, right? All those things, the constraints of, you know, what we have access to in the gym fall on the higher end of the spectrum. So like those muscle groups tend to be things for me like middle delts, you know, rear delts, calves, and that's, you know, pretty much it for the sort of higher end of the spectrum. But, you know, when I think about like general volume recommendations, if I have no context whatsoever, I generally just use a safe guideline of like, hey man, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 15. Just take a guess somewhere in between there and then like just see what happens, you know, and that's kind of where I'll leave it. But the most important thing to me, and I think the quickest way to get maybe a better idea relative to the individual, is to ask them to send you if you're an online coach, obviously this is happening constantly, but like ask them to send you a set of like any exercise, like, hey, send me a set of, leg extensions and like make them 0 RAR. A lot of times I feel like that alone, of course, like they could be doing different exercises in different ways, but that alone will give you, I think, a lot of information about this person and sort of what you might need to prescribe versus what, you might need to prescribe someone who is truly like digging into the depths of their mind, to destroy every fiber of muscle in their being on a given set. So the short answer would be anywhere from 5 to 15, I would say, is the average, or 4 to 15 is the average. But for me, most of the time, I think I lend more to the sort of 5 to 10 per week per muscle group. And I think that how you set up your exercises and the effort that you put into the exercises that you're doing, I think those two things, to me at least, need to be the discussion that precedes the volume discussion.
Yeah, there's so many, especially when I was a young coach, I would always overthink my programming. And then like one day I realized, I was like, wait, I just really suck at getting some of my clients to train hard. It was just because when you sort of brought that up, I was like, yeah, there's probably a lot of coaches right now that are like sitting up on a Sunday night, updating their clients' program, being like, oh, fuck, should I do 6 reps or 8 reps? Oh, fuck, they're not making progress. Oh, I've got to optimize their fucking program. I'm like, just have a look at are they training hard? And it can be hard to train hard. Sometimes there's logistical issues and sometimes there are programming issues indeed. But yeah, just having a look back, send me a video of your train and then just you as the coach, just honestly looking at it and be like, yeah, right, I do just need to tell this person to train harder. Like that is okay. I just feel like a lot of the time we get overly technical with it and coaches just lose so much confidence because again, they're like, fuck, just trying to problem solve through all the nuances of programming and periodization. Something that you sort of touched on in that answer to Jacob about volume, I think you kind of hinted at the idea that you progress volume, whatever the fuck that even means, throughout the mesocycle. Is that true, or are you more static with it? Because I want to ask you about the role of periodization in bodybuilding and how much you're sort of changing things versus just trying to find an acceptable amount of work and doing that week in, week out.
Yeah. So to me, it really comes down to the timeline. So if it's, let's say within the first like month or so of a program, I will escalate volume. Or if it's in the first month or so of, a new exercise introduction, I'll escalate volume. And then after that point, I really just don't. It's really just load and reps that are sort of pushing the volume load, so to speak, and the effort and the progress from there.
Nice. That really simplifies things as well because, yeah, I feel like that's another thing where people could just sort of go off the rails with it, whereas like, again, it sort of just comes back to we're trying to work hard and there's just like going to be a dose of that that's in the sweet spot.
Yeah. And also one thing I would add just to the prior question too, we talked about like it from an effort perspective, like what does the set look like for you? And then what exercises are you doing? But also just like, I think really undervalued are things like, just the discussion of like how much fatigue, let's say like a long length partial will generate relative to something that appears to be full range, but is actually like a short length partial. Like, so most leg extensions, for example, are very disproportionately challenging at the top of like very few leg extensions are set up mechanically such that they match the quote sort of strength curve of the muscle, the strength ability of the muscle. And so if you use a leg extension that's really heavy at the top and yet you're doing full range, and then you go to use a leg extension that's actually set up heavy at the bottom, that you're also using full range in, like I can almost, there's somewhat of an arbitrary number here, but if I could handle, 10 sets a week of that short leg extension, I could maybe handle like 5 or 6 of the longer length one. And that also applies to like every other exercise, so it's like, pull downs, like any kind of cable pull down, heavy at the bottom. First time, if you've ever used a machine that is heavy at the top of a pull down, like we were talking about earlier, or if you're doing like long length partials in a pull down and you're loading the shit out of that range, like your ability to tolerate those things is so different that it just makes, it's like we're comparing apples to oranges when we say one set of this to one set of this. It's just as a categorically distinct thing to me. So it like, on some level, I can walk away from a conversation being like 5 to 15, and I'm like comfortable with that. But then on another deeper level, I'm like irked at the fact that like a set is not a set, you know?
Because that's it. When you get a DM on Instagram and someone's like, how many sets per week? You can't just be like, what does volume even mean? And like, because then you have to be there and fucking guide them through that conversation.
Yeah.
Because now we're sort of getting into the theory of just like how you communicate ideas and how much information you need to give someone. But yeah, it can just be a head fuck when you're just staring at that DM. You're like, which way do I want to go with this? do I want to help someone get an answer today, or do I want to like just teach them for the next 6 months?
Teach a man to fish, maybe. Except it's more like you're, you know, it's not really fishing. It's more
not
like,
everyone can be a fisherman. I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a fair take.
Or is that pessimistic? Yeah, I've been called out for that attitude. It's just saying like not everyone can think critically. Like it's just whatever. Anyway, so just getting into other shit. This has been a long chat already, but I did want to touch on some business stuff. Because I think a lot of coaches, there's a lot of, I think selling one-to-one coaching, you can make a fuck ton of money, and I think it's a great business model. I think it's really impactful. There's a lot of good things about it. I also see a lot of coaches who have Lambo dreams, and you're just not going to get there if all you're offering is one-to-one coaching. I also think that there's a lot of coaches who've built decent audiences, and they're just not earning nearly as much money as they could be because all they offer is one-to-one coaching. 90% of the people who follow them already have an online coach and maybe think they're a weird fucking person who they don't want to hire as their coach, but they learn from it and fucking what. So what are your thoughts on selling different things and like obviously you want to make things that are useful, but just opening yourself up to being more than a trainer with your offering? How have you progressed that over time? What are your thoughts?
You know, to me, it was just always a thing that made sense. Like when I started out the online thing, my main goal was like, I just, for whatever reason, loved the idea of making money as I slept. Like there's just something particularly empowering about that. You know, you wake up to some money, or like something I do with my fiance is oftentimes like we'll be at dinner and I'll look at my phone and I'll be like, oh, this person paid for our meal, or which sounds really pretentious and obnoxious and elitist. However, what I would say is that is possible for you if you're listening and if you're confident about creating a valuable product.
No greater feeling alive. No greater feeling. And it's the same way, like you can earn it shoveling shit, laying bricks. It's just money for the work, because it's like we've done work that led to the money coming in while we slept. But the way it works and affects the psychology is very horny.
We value your input here at the High Performance Podcast. Head to the SpeakPipe link in the notes below and you can leave us a voicemail where you can ask us a question or leave us a topic for us to explore on the show. We hope to hear from you soon.
It's a crazy dopamine hit, I'd imagine.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that first $1, man, there's nothing like, I remember where I was when I made the first $1. I was in my bed. I'm not even kidding. I was in my bedroom. Someone brought a program. It was spectacular. Anyway, so my overall thoughts are that people should realize that it takes a lot more work to create something like a course than, at least if you're going to make the course valuable. You know, everything from planning the content to writing the content to watching it and realizing how much it sucks, to then remaking it and reposting it, and this question wasn't answered, you know, and this person asked this question that wasn't in the video, so now I have to remake the video. Or there's all these like externalities around creating these products that are super annoying, much like, just as is true with, you know, content creation. Like people think that like we just wake up and, you know, there the post is, it just like came out of nowhere and, you know, money is in my bank account. Right. So I would just maybe caution that there are other sides to it and that it's not all sunshine and rainbows, despite the money, you know, in the sleep or while eating steak, on a nice night out. But what I would say is that for me, it's definitely always been the most compelling. I did one-on-one coaching for several years, as I mentioned, and that was really enjoyable to me. But I really didn't like the idea of being on other people's schedules and feeling like I needed to be particular, I need to be on my phone at particular times. So I'm definitely super biased in the direction of single purchase products. So, I've made my business and my living the last several years around courses and ebooks. That's pretty much it.
I also think a lot of people as well, they have this bias towards trying to drive up subscription revenue. And I think that can be a very viable strategy. It's good to have different forms of revenue, but I think there's a big oversubscription thing where people just have this desire. I don't want to be fucking taxed weekly or monthly for every single fucking thing I purchase. Just let me have something. How much do you want from it?
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. I think that's huge because, and I'll like, it's crazy how big the psychological piece is to it. Cause you'll be like, hey, do you want to pay $25 a month for this for the next year? Which would be about $300 US, or do you want to pay $1,000 for this, for your life? And meanwhile, that person's not like, it's crazy. Like, oh, $25 versus 1,000. But like people are almost weirdly more attracted to the 1,000 in some ways. Obviously varies depending on the population and who you're talking to or about. But for me, I've absolutely tried to go the route of the subscription-based thing. And it's just way harder. It's way harder than people realize. And I think that the evidence that you see of people making a ton of money through subscriptions, like those were usually built over years and years and years and years.
And their lead gen is fucking insane.
Yeah. So it's like that to me was just never appealing. It was never appealing while I was trying to do it. So now I've been single purchase stuff for a while now. And I think the last thing that I would add to that is that I almost, it's a weird way to conceptualize it, but like if your social media is growing, and people are continually purchasing your products, like that to me is enough of a subscription, but it's like new people, like, it's like, I have no evidence, you know what I mean? I have no evidence to suggest.
Feels like monthly recurring revenue. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is, it isn't, but it is, so as long as you just keep growing, to infinity, then, and who knows, like, I don't ever anticipate there will ever be a cap on how many people purchase, a program or an ebook. It's like, there's so many more people out there than you can possibly realize that you could receive money from.
If
and
you
I don't
converted
think
a certain amount with a certain audience, and audience grows, like,
yeah, exactly. So that's kind of my bias, and that's why I lean that way. It's just experientially, it's been better for me.
Email marketing, overrated, underrated?
I guess it depends on like the internet bubble you're in.
Or like yeah, no, because you're right. The conversation around it has shifted. I think people thinking it's like dead and overrated. How much do you like it and use it?
I use it constantly.
And what's your view of it? Sorry, as well, I'll finish the question because I think a lot of people view it as a pure sales channel. How do you view the role of email marketing in your ecosystem?
Yeah, I just view it as more intimate content creation. That's pretty much kind of how I see it. I mean, I think about like when someone sends me an email, even if they're selling me a product, if it's someone who I appreciate from a knowledge perspective and entertainment perspective, my brain is never in like I'm being sold to mode. Like I'm in my email. It's a very intimate, sexy little space. It's my private little domain. And I'm speaking to someone sort of much more directly that way. Even potentially more directly than in something like a DM. Like a DM feels very sort of informal, not particularly intimate. But emails to me, and when I receive them from people who I'm subscribed to with their newsletters, I'm like, I don't know. I just the framework that my mind assumes when I'm reading an email is very different, even from something, let's say, like YouTube, where my brain is more expanded on YouTube than it is on Instagram or Twitter. Or
they
TikTok.
never say "Hey Ben" to start a YouTube video, whereas every email is "Hey Ben." Like,
yeah, like what's up, Ben? How's your weekend going? So I think. Again, it depends on what bubble you're in. I would say it's probably underrated. And I would say the most underrated aspect of email is just the automation capability. So like, for instance, I have an automation sequence that is set up to send someone an email 50 days in a row after they sign up to the newsletter. And
I gotta get some automations. I'm raw dogging.
So, but here's the thing too, is like the disconnect between content creators on email and people who are just normal people who receive emails is like, that divide is so much bigger than on social media. Because when you're on social media, you're like, okay, I know how to use it as a user. I know how to navigate it. I know how people are posting. But when people, and I've had this feedback, people will come up to me and say, just like friends who are receiving my emails, they're like, dude, that's crazy. Like, you wake up and you like write those emails every day. And I'm like, no, dude, I wrote that email like 3 months ago, and you're receiving number 29 of 50 today. So just because people aren't aware of it. And so as long as that veil is sort of maintained, people, and it's not, there's nothing that's immoral or unethical about it. Like, you're just creating automation, you're providing the value, and you're giving someone a chance every single day to click that link, at the end of the email. And I've had people who buy on day 50, and I'm like, damn, 50 days in,
wow,
that's pretty cool.
That's a huge dopamine hit as well. That's big delayed gratification. I just want to hear a little bit more of the layout of the full ecosystem of the business, because I sort of look at it, I'm sure you're probably the same, as like exposure over time will turn them into a customer. So I can consume like 30 to 60 seconds of Ben Yanes every day on Instagram. Sorry, because there was a period where you were doing more than one post a day. You're one post a day currently.
Yeah, one is the minimum. Sometimes I get a little funky, but it's really just one.
And then what's your YouTube schedule? Is the podcast still going? And then we've also got the email. Is there any other thing that you sort of view as that, this is how I sort of go through that awareness to nurturing to customer stage?
So I would say, if I had to define a clear funnel, it's always some kind of social media content to a link to my website to the newsletter. And that's
not necessarily through multiple socials, typically one social and then into something that's a bit more intimate.
Yeah. So it's usually, all paths will sort of funnel into the same, ecosystem, if that makes sense. So it's like YouTube has a link to newsletter, stories on Instagram has a link in bio has a link. It's just all the fucking links across all the platforms are the same. And it just, link me to the same spot, which is the newsletter. People say that like selling content directly through like links and stories is like kind of dead. That has not been my experience.
Yeah.
Like, I'll just
I'm glad someone else is saying that.
I think that if so, here's my opinion on that is, if you don't provide any value in your stories, then I don't think people who are going to buy are not going to click on your story. So I treat Instagram stories.
Love your stories, by the way. The interactive ones. That's genius. Yeah. I'm always voting on that muscle. Which muscle is it?
Yeah, exactly. And so the more people get the sense that like that is basically just another version of a post, those people are collectively just going to continue to come back and click on the story and hopefully eventually purchase. Like, the link in the story has been my number one thing since I've started creating, like, more than email, more than any other, methodology.
Because I agree that email is purpose built much more so for marketing.
Yeah.
But unless your email list grows, like, if you can't get your whole fucking following onto your email list, it's like, you're still probably going to bag more direct selling through socials.
Yeah.
But I like that doing sort of both. Oh, sorry, you have more to say, because I also want to ask you to review my YouTube strategy. Did you have more to say on this?
The last thing that I was going to say, and this is somewhat recent, if I don't even know how many days it's been, but I, for the longest time, just totally avoided YouTube. And I don't remember when I started, but I made a deal with myself that I would post a YouTube video every day, and just to see what happens. So I've been on that for
Is that just the GOAT strategy?
Yeah. It's like, who would have thought? Post every day. Yeah. So it's been like 2 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 months. More like a month and a half. So a month and a half of posting every day. Everything is trending in the right direction. And I'm very happy with it so far. And I really enjoy making YouTube videos because I've had just selected the lowest friction format. I basically do minimal editing. I speak in front of a whiteboard about a question, and I stitch some exercises on there, and that's it. So I'll see where the YouTube thing goes.
To that as well, a bit more the long form content. I feel like that highly edited stuff is
that's
probably even dying out. Yeah, I think it's dying out even in like reels. Like people just want to sit down and like a conversation with someone more. So yeah, I
totally agree with that, and that's definitely what because I think part of I assume that part of my responsibility, not that everyone has to assume this, but part of my responsibility is to add things into the space that I want to see. So if I'm going to be paying some editor to make 70 edits within the span of 4 seconds, I'm a hypocrite because I don't want to see that, and I also don't want to spend money on that. So yeah, that's what I would say. What were you going to say, Angus?
My initial view of YouTube was that it was a way for me to further nurture a deeper relationship with my audience, right? It's like, they're getting a lot of hot takes and shorter form content, which is building engagement on socials. And the same as the podcast, right? It just is a more intimate sort of relationship. And my view was, I don't necessarily need to optimize my content for YouTube in any sort of way, or play the algorithmic side as hard on that platform, because I am basically just going to use Instagram as a funnel into my YouTube. But then I'm like, I want to know, because I was skeptical about maybe my ability to grow organically at the rate that I wanted on YouTube. But I'm like, I probably should just play that game, like treat the platform for what it is. Because even then it influencing how much I cross post. Like every time you do a YouTube video, are you sharing it out to your IG audience? And if you A/B tested not doing that and then seeing how the video performed, I know this is sort of just getting rambly, but my thoughts aren't that coherent on it at this stage. I'm also on a break because I'm building out my back end and I don't have a fucking offering at the moment. I'm selling a content creation ebook and a group fucking GPP program, but it's all sort of going to be released over the next month. And then I'll be full steam ahead back into YouTube. Thoughts? So yeah, is that a good strategy, just using Instagram as a funnel into YouTube and using that primarily as the strategy to get some early sort of numbers on there? Or do you think you're better off just treating it as a separate thing?
The way, because I ran into this exact question, and for some time I would provide the link and, go find this. I just no longer wanted to do that because I no longer wanted to post another story. And the way that
there's only so many you can post before you have to then say something valuable. You can't always just be linking them elsewhere. It's like you'll take your story algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it just came down to the question of the question you're asking, which is do you keep each within their lanes or do you try to funnel people into the long form? My opinion is that the people who are invested in you are going to find you on YouTube. If someone's really into you, the content you make, the value you provide, there's not a single person who I know is invested in my content now that doesn't know about my YouTube. And I haven't posted about my YouTube basically since I've been posting. So in some sense, I think the argument in favor of posting the link in the story to funnel people in, you might say what's the harm? And I'd say the potential harm is to your Instagram, right? It's not to your YouTube. Obviously you could funnel people in. And so the question would just be how much do you then value what you provide in your stories? And are you willing to sacrifice a little bit of that in order to funnel people into this other content? I think if I had to just, in this sort of solicited way, I would say no. I would probably say keep the audiences separate and keep the value specific to the platform.
I agree with what you said. It's if the diehard Angus fans are going to find me on any platform, I will come up in their YouTube recommendations. If they want to see a 20-minute video yapping about some shit that bad, and I might get a couple of extra maybe there's some people, it's just like, they don't have any YouTubers that they watch, and maybe I'd be there for, but yeah, it's like most people are active on YouTube. Okay, good. Very clear advice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. And I also think that like there's something to be said too about like intense segmentation, like, because there are consumers who will just never go on YouTube because things that are longer than 40 seconds are too long. And there are people who will never go on Instagram because videos that are shorter than a minute create brain damage. And so I think that's just the nature of these things. And certain people will be on Instagram, certain people will be on YouTube, and some kind of population will be an overlap between the two. And I think that as long as you can create content specific to the platform and then create products that are specific to those kinds of people, then like you're in a good situation.
One last question before we let you go. Is it worth it from a content creator's perspective doing a 2-hour fucking video on quad hypertrophy? Because I've seen this as like a trend. People just try to do like a really long video on saying mega valuable, of course.
Yeah.
But that's a lot. Or was that like not that hard logistically because you kept the editing to a minimum and you had a lot to say?
Yeah, it was not that hard. To answer the question, no, I would not advise it. I did it once. I'm probably not going to do it again. People don't care. So yeah, don't do that.
So the Ben Yanes diehard's got a real trait, but yeah, it wasn't.
I will say there was there was one text that I got from someone that I really respect a lot, and he was like raving about it, and that almost pushed me to do another one. But I just like. But then he also told me that he really likes that same person told me that he really likes the sort of medium, 6 to 12 minutes. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to stick with this for now.
It was probably one I was more like, I think everyone respected the 2 hours on quads. You respect it. But like, they didn't need it.
Yeah, if they even clicked on it, dude. I mean, most people probably didn't even click on it.
I'm not going to lie. I mean, I'm not your target market for that. But I respected the fucking hell of it. I was like, my man is making some content.
Yeah, I was telling my fiance this the other day because I honestly didn't even realize it for whatever reason. But almost 100% of my day is just creating stuff. It's just creation. It's writing.
I see the output. I talk about you with other people because when I can't post every fucking day, I'm like, you just build it up over time. And you're someone who I point out as, I'm like, look at this cunt's output. There's quality. Yeah, you have good ideas on training, but there is also just an impressive amount of output.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it just has to kind of become something that, I mean, like anything else is just kind of like baked into your life, like brushing your teeth is. Most days.
I know I said it was last question, but what drives you? Because don't you ever get bag complacency? Like there's this phenomenon where it sort of sorts out who's an entrepreneur and who's not when like people just make a big bag and then they sort of get complacent. Sorry, I know you're not a fucking multi-millionaire. Who knows how Ben Yanes is doing, but I assume things are pretty good. Like I imagine business is pretty good for you. What keeps you going? Like, yeah. Have you found yourself getting complacent at any point? Because I haven't really seen it. And what is your attitude towards it? What are you trying to do?
To be honest, I think that the answer to me comes down to two things. One is I have a bit of a complicated relationship with money, as most people do, such that when one goalpost is achieved, the goalpost shifts. But that is always balanced by one thing, which is the people in my life. And not to get all wholesome, but the reason that I do this stuff on days that I would really rather not is because I want to be able to have a lot of money to provide for my future family, which actually I had a discussion last night. Looks like it's going to be about maybe another 5 years, 4 years.
I thought we were going to get the Ben Yanes baby announcement on the podcast.
No,
like, oh my
dude.
God, Ben, you don't have to.
No, I wish, dude. I wish.
Oh,
But to
man.
me, it's honestly like that is, my fiance is pretty much my driver. And by the way, the only reason I think she's my driver and like the future prospect of family is because of the fact that she genuinely would love me and live with me if I were living on the fucking sidewalk. And so, perhaps not the answer that was expected.
Now I'm even more jealous. I've never had that feeling in a relationship.
Did a ride or die, Angus, and then.
Yeah. So for me, like, I guess the answer in brief is just other people. Like, it's just, I feel like humans can only get so far doing things for themselves. I feel like at some point you have to just outsource it, like you outsource, your fucking podcast editing.
Yeah, absolutely. Phenomenal. For the few people who aren't aware or haven't seen your content, where would you like to send them? Have you got anything else coming up that you want people to know about, or should they just sort of hit follow and stumble down the funnels?
No, just hit follow, man. Find yourself in my 50-day email sequence, and we can go from there. Modernmeathead.com. Modernmeathead.com is where all the things are. It's a cute little website. I made it myself, so check it out.
Hell yeah.
If you're sick of going goblin mode on the same 4 accessory exercises at the end of every single session, head to the notes below and grab our free gymnastics program. It'll change the way you think about accessories forever.